Ned Stark felt the weight of the crown before he ever touched it. The aftermath of the rebellion against the Targaryen dynasty had left Westeros battered and bruised, but victorious under the banners of houses Stark and Baratheon, Tully and Arryn, and the myriad of other noble families who had stood against the Mad King's tyranny. Among them was Eddard Stark, newly returned from the battlefields of the Trident, carrying on his back both the weight of grief and the hopes of countless lords who saw him as a man of honor in a realm that so desperately needed one. The expectation that he might assume the throne had not been spoken in open halls, not even whispered in the corridors of the Red Keep. Initially, it was Robert Baratheon whom all believed would don the golden circlet and rule from the Iron Throne. But fate, like a swirl of northern snow, can change shape in an instant, and Ned soon found himself at the center of a destiny no one had foreseen. He arrived in King's Landing shrouded in the dust of battle, his face ashen with exhaustion, his dark hair matted and tangled. He had scarcely slept in days. The city's narrow streets were choked with the reek of smoke from burnt buildings, the gutters stained with dried blood. The small folk craned their necks and turned out in throngs, hoping to catch a glimpse of the rebels they believed had freed them from madness. Yet the sight that greeted Ned was neither triumphant nor joyous. The stench of death clung to the air, and a hush seemed to overtake even the children playing in the alleys. The realm was on the cusp of great change, and though the Targaryen banners had been torn down, the sense of fear and uncertainty lingered like a storm cloud threatening to break. Within the Red Keep, the corridors echoed with the last pleas of the dying king, Aerys II, his voice remembered only by the flickering torches that had borne witness. The Mad King's lifeblood had been spilled on his own throne room steps by Jaime Lannister, the young King Guard who had broken every vow by slaying the very monarch he was sworn to protect. No words could quell the disquiet that followed. It was a relief to many that the Targaryen reign ended that day, but there was no agreement on what form the new monarchy should take. Robert Baratheon had a claim through his grandmother, Rhaelle Targaryen. By blood, he was tied to the old dynasty, which made him an acceptable heir in the eyes of many lords. But Robert lay gravely wounded after the Battle of the Trident, his side cleaved open by Rhaegar Targaryen's last stroke. His survival was uncertain, and each passing hour, Grand Maester Pycelle shook his head in grim silence. Few men knew if Robert would ever stand again, let alone sit a throne. Hoster Tully, Jon Arryn, and others turned fretful gazes upon the realm. They saw an immediate need for leadership to hold the rebellion's alliances together lest the realm splinter into 1,000 petty wars. The Targaryen forces still lurked in pockets across the Crownlands, and some of the loyalist lords and minor houses refused to bend the knee until a figurehead commanded them. Rumors ran rampant that Prince Viserys and Princess Daenerys, the children of the Mad King, had escaped across the narrow sea, spirited away under the black wings of House Targaryen's remaining allies. The uncertainty of that threat, an exiled prince who might one day return to reclaim his father's seat, gnawed at the minds of the victors. The realm yearned for stability, and as the days wore on, the lords began to speak of Eddard Stark as the only man who could be king in Robert's stead. At first, Ned balked at the notion. He had been raised in the Vale as a second son, never expecting to inherit Winterfell. Then fate had claimed his elder brother, Brandon, and thrust Ned into the position of Lord of Winterfell. That alone was a heavy crown upon his head, for the north was vast, cold, and difficult to govern. Yet Winterfell was his birthright, and he accepted his duties with stoicism. But the Iron Throne? The very idea of it made his stomach clench. He was a man who wore furs and cloaks fit for the snows, not the ornamental robes of a king. He had seen what ambition for the throne had done to men, how it had twisted them, corrupted them. He wanted nothing to do with that seat of swords. But while Ned was reluctant, the realm pressed forward. It was not a single event that compelled him to concede to the demands of the lords, but a series of small moments that strung together like the beads of a rosary. Robert, delirious with fever, clutched Ned's hand and babbled about Lyanna, about the love he had borne her, about the wedding they would never share. The healers whispered that if the infection in Robert's wound spread, the tide of war might shift again. Jon Arryn, Ned's foster father, sat him down by a window overlooking Blackwater Bay. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and fish. Jon's voice was gentle but firm. He pointed out that the lords of the realm needed a strong and honorable king to unite them, someone with fewer claims but greater respect. The rebellion had been won by a coalition that believed in justice and order, not by those who craved the old bloodlines. The talk that Ned was the realm's best hope grew steadily until it was no longer mere whispers in the shadows but open calls in the hall. Finally, after many sleepless nights, Ned Stark agreed to accept the crown. It was not with a flourish of horns, not with a grand parade, it was with a somber vow taken in the quiet heart of the Red Keep's godwood. He knelt beneath the ancient weirwood that had been transplanted from the north, the heart tree's red leaves trembling under the southern sun. Its face was carved in old times, though the lines were smoother than those in Winterfell's weirwood. There, in the presence of the old gods and the new, he voiced his acceptance. Perhaps the gods themselves had a hand in guiding his words, or perhaps he was too weary to deny fate any longer. Regardless, the realm would have a new king, and that king would be Ned Stark. He was crowned shortly thereafter, a simple ceremony compared to the pomp of Targaryen coronations. Grand Maester Pycelle placed a gold circlet upon Ned's brow engraved with a dire wolf on one side and a stag on the other, signifying the union of Stark honor and Baratheon might. The lords roared their approval, some more enthusiastically than others, and the small folk cheered in the streets with a tentative sort of optimism. The first king of the realm in centuries not to bear the name Targaryen looked out upon his people, aware that he carried a heavy burden. As if to echo his concern, the Iron Throne loomed behind him, a throne of twisted, melted blades, each representing a conquered foe from ages past. The chill in the throne room made him think momentarily of the north. And in that resonant hush, a new era dawned. Word traveled across the Seven Kingdoms. In the north, ravens arrived in Winterfell carrying the news that Eddard Stark had been named king, while Sansa and Arya, barely old enough to understand the gravity of it, asked their mother why father was staying away so long. In the Vale, those who had known Ned in his youth as a quiet ward to Jon Arryn marveled at the notion of him wearing a crown. In Dorne, the Martells scowled, for Elia Martell had perished in the war, and their hatred for the northern usurpers burned like the desert sun. In the west, Tywin Lannister took stock of his losses and gains, a predator's gleam in his eyes as he assessed how best to position himself in the new order. Across the narrow sea, exiled Targaryens would certainly brood on the injustice done to their house. Yet even those who despised the new regime had to concede that King Eddard Stark was no brutal tyrant. He was loved for his honor, and fear, though present, did not ooze like a choking fog over King's Landing as it had under Aerys. As the months passed, King Eddard Stark began his rule in earnest. The war-torn kingdom demanded urgent attention. Where the royal treasury was once rumored to be filled with gold, now the coffers rattled with the hollowness of near-empty chests, drained by the costs of rebellion. Fields across the riverlands lay scorched, and the small folk who survived the battles found themselves homeless, their barns burned, their crops pillaged. With every raven that arrived, Ned felt the tide of responsibility swell higher. He established a council, granting positions to those he believed possessed both loyalty and competence. Jon Arryn became Hand of the King, the right hand that would guide Ned through the complexities of rulership. Hoster Tully took charge of reconstruction efforts in the Riverlands, which had borne the brunt of the war. Stannis Baratheon, Robert's brother, was named Master of Ships, though his mood was as stormy as the sea, perhaps enraged at the power slipping from House Baratheon's grasp. Renly, a younger and more charming man, was accorded a place in the king's court, though the exact nature of his duties remained nebulous. In the great hall of the Red Keep, Ned Stark held court. It was a subdued affair, lacking the extravagance of past Targaryen kings. Instead of peacocks and lavish displays of wealth, the hall bustled with lords petitioning for aid in rebuilding, and knights hoping for recognition of valor. Ned listened to them all, brow furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. He promised them what help the crown could afford, though in truth the treasury was perilously low. Taxes had to be raised, and for that Ned felt an acute pang of guilt. He remembered the long winters in the north, how the small folk often had to ration grain to survive. The thought of imposing higher levies on families already struggling made his stomach churn. Yet the throne demanded gold, and gold was the mortar that held the kingdom's walls upright. So he acquiesced, whispering silent prayers that the price of peace would not be too high for the realm to bear. All the while, Robert Baratheon lay in his bedchamber, fighting for his life. Grand Maester Pycelle tended to him daily, applying poultices and administering potions to stave off infection. For weeks on end, Robert drifted in and out of fevered dreams. Ned visited him whenever time allowed, taking the man's hand and calling him brother. For had they not grown up as wards in the Vale together, learning swordplay side by side? Robert's once robust form had grown thin. His hair lost its luster, and his powerful arms lay limp against the coverlets. At times, he would awaken and mutter about Lyanna, demanding to know where she was, why she had not come. Ned would feel his heart tear at these words, for Lyanna, his sister, was gone, spirited away by Rhaegar Targaryen, and then claimed by death in a dark tower to the south. He had never told Robert the full truth of her last words, how she had made him swear to protect a secret that might have toppled the realm again. It was a burden he carried alone. Gradually, Robert's health improved enough for him to stand on wobbly legs. He was not the man he once was, though, and his laughter came less frequently. During his convalescence, he learned of Ned's coronation. The news hit him with a mixture of relief and loss. He had desired the throne once, if only because it gave him the power to avenge Lyanna, to root out the Targaryens and crush them beneath his heel. But the victory felt hollow in his weakened state. When Ned finally stood before him, wearing a simple robe rather than kingly finery, Robert grasped his friend's arm and looked at the crown Ned held in his other hand. In a hoarse whisper, Robert said that he was glad the burden did not rest on his shoulders. Perhaps the gods had spared him from what would have been a doomed reign, for while Robert Baratheon was fearless on the battlefield, he had little taste for the drudgery of governance. The realm thus steadied itself under a new equilibrium. King Eddard Stark ruled from King's Landing, but his heart was always tugged northward to Winterfell and the snows of his childhood. Catelyn remained in the north with their children, tending to the domain in Ned's absence. Ravens flew regularly between Winterfell and the Red Keep, carrying updates on the progress of Little Rob's lessons, Sansa's sweet voice singing in the Godwood, Arya's wild escapades, and baby Bran's first fumbling steps. Each letter from Catelyn made Ned yearn for home all the more. Yet he could not abandon the realm to chaos. He had to sit the Iron Throne, hold counsel with the lords, and ensure peace took root. Not all was peaceful, however. A kingship born of rebellion must reckon with the lingering bitterness of the houses that lost. The Martells in Dorne bore deep resentment. Their princess, Elia Martell, had been Rhaegar's wife, and she and her children had met a brutal end at the hands of Lannister forces. Oberyn Martell, a man of fiery passion, simmered with rage. Though the crown offered terms of reconciliation, Oberyn refused them with scorn. King Eddard sent emissaries, gold, and overtures of amity, hoping to calm Dorne's fury. Some Dornish lords accepted the crown's generosity, particularly those who craved trade and the restoration of roads. But in the shadows, more militant Dornishmen sharpened their spears, craving vengeance. Rumors circulated of secret gatherings in the deserts, of alliances forming across the sea with magisters in Pentos or Bravos who might lend funds. Ned kept a weary eye on Dorne, mindful that any spark could ignite another war. The West, too, posed its own challenges. Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, had timed his entry into the rebellion with calculated precision. He brought his forces into King's Landing only after it was clear the Targaryen cause was lost. That act of betrayal secured victory for the rebels, but it also planted seeds of distrust everywhere. Many whispered that Tywin had acted purely out of ambition, seeking to place his family in positions of power. Jaime Lannister had broken his Kingsguard vows by slaying the Mad King, an act that, while removing a tyrant, also tarnished Jaime's honor in the eyes of knights and noblemen across Westeros. Cersei Lannister had been betrothed to Prince Rhaegar once, or so the rumor went, but that marriage never materialized. Now, as King Eddard Stark ruled, Tywin expected compensation for his support. He pressed for advantageous marriages, perhaps to tie the Lannisters to the new royal family. But Ned found the thought distasteful. He did not wish to see Sansa or Arya wed to a Lannister, not after all that had transpired. He placated Tywin with less consequential honors, awarding him certain titles that carried prestige but little power, hoping that would buy peace. King Eddard Stark's reign soon focused on healing rather than expansion or conquest. The Riverlands were still scarred, so he poured what resources he could spare into rebuilding roads, bridges, and farmland. He commissioned masons and carpenters to restore the villages burned by Gregor Clegane and other Targaryen loyalists. Crop seeds from Highgarden were shipped north and east, and whatever surplus was gleaned from the fertile fields was sent to the Crownlands to feed the swollen population of King's Landing. This action won him favor among many small folk, who praised their new king for bringing them bread rather than more swords. Yet some of the high lords grumbled. For every coin spent on the small folk was a coin that could have fattened their purses. Still, Ned's sense of honor compelled him to do what he thought was right, and the realm gradually showed signs of recovery. There were unexpected consequences, too. The people came to love him, They called him the Winter King, for he bore the starkness of the north in his demeanor, a quiet resolve that promised fair judgment. Street singers composed ballads about his mercy, about the day he spared a traitorous knight who had surrendered. The knight's life was forfeit by law, yet Ned showed clemency and instead took his lands as crown property. Whispers abounded that, in those lands, he built an orphanage for children left homeless by the war. True or not, the rumor only enhanced his legend. The small folk admired him, but the lords were less certain. To them, mercy could be weakness. They remembered the days of Aegon the Conqueror and the Targaryen kings who had wielded dragons to maintain order. Now, they were ruled by a man with no dragons, only a sense of duty. Many asked themselves if that would be enough to keep the kingdom united. Across the sea, Viserys Targaryen bristled in exile. Word reached him through smugglers and loyalists that the usurper on the Iron Throne was not Robert Baratheon but Eddard Stark. To Viserys, that was an even deeper insult. The Targaryens had lost to low-born rebels, or so he saw them, and the rightful crown prince was forced to scrabble for coin in cities like Bravos, Pentos, or Lys. He had his little sister Daenerys with him, still just a girl, but already blossoming into womanhood. She was the last female Targaryen of royal blood, an asset that could be wed to some powerful ally in return for ships and gold. Viserys' resentment festered, and he spoke often of the day he would reclaim the Iron Throne and see Eddard Stark's head mounted on a spike. Such rants drew the attention of magisters and mercenaries, some of whom saw opportunity in the exiled prince's anger, while others saw only the delusions of a beggar king. That threat, distant though it was, did not escape Ned's attention. Varys the Spider, spymaster of King's Landing, kept an extensive network of informants even across the narrow sea. He advised caution. The Targaryen names still held mystique in Essos, and there were sales-word companies, such as the Golden Company, famously founded by a Targaryen bastard who might be persuaded to rally behind Viserys. Ned listened gravely, but he would not sanction assassins or underhanded plots to murder children in exile. He insisted they wait and watch. If the day came when Viserys Targaryen returned to Westeros seeking blood, then the realm would deal with him as an enemy. But Ned would not stoop to the methods that had sullied the Lannisters' reputation. He recalled too well the sight of Rhaegar's children, their tiny bodies laid out in the throne room, an atrocity pinned on men seeking royal favor. It haunted him still. Time passed, and with each season King Eddard Stark grew more accustomed to the demands of rule. He held audiences in the Great Hall, dined with diplomats from across the narrow seas, and learned the intricate game of alliances between the Seven Kingdoms. The North's loyalty was unwavering, for House Stark's name was revered in those cold lands, but the same could not be said for the other regions. The Reach, led by Mace Tyrell, had bent the knee to the new king but always negotiated the best trade deals for Highgarden first. The Stormlands looked to Stannis for guidance, though he was a sullen figure who rarely spoke except to criticize what he perceived as Ned's lenience. The Vale supported him out of loyalty to Jon Arryn, but was ever mindful of threats from the Mountains of the Moon. And the Iron Islands, restless under House Greyjoy, made no secret of their contempt for a mainland king. Ned had to navigate these seas of competing interests, and he did so with the honesty that characterized him. His decrees were meant to be fair, even if they were not always popular. One of the most significant challenges came from the Ironborn themselves. Balon Greyjoy, chafing under the rule of a king he deemed weak, tested the waters by sending his longships to raid along the western coasts. They struck small coastal villages, pillaging and taking thralls, then vanished CK into the mists of the Sunset Sea. The lords of the Westerlands complained vehemently, demanding that King Eddard take action. Ned responded by dispatching Stannis with a royal fleet to patrol the waters, though open warfare was avoided for the moment. Still, the seeds of rebellion were there. Like brambles creeping under a garden wall, they threatened to burst forth if left unchecked. But Ned was reluctant to plunge the realm into another war so soon. He sought diplomatic resolutions, offering to host Balon or his envoys in King's Landing to discuss grievances. The Ironborn had never been averse to violence, but perhaps an understanding could be reached without unsheathing swords again. Amid these political storms, Ned found rare moments of solace in the Red Keep's Godwood. It was smaller than Winterfell's, but it contained a heart tree with white bark and red leaves. In its carved face, Ned sought a connection to the old gods, a faint reminder of home. He would kneel there at dusk, the hush of the city around him, the wind off the Blackwater Bay carrying faint echoes of gulls. He prayed for strength, for guidance, for a respite from the burden of kingship. Often he remembered the promise he made to Lyanna on her deathbed and wondered if his new station might ever force him to reveal truths best kept hidden. Each time he resolved to hold fast to his vow. Some secrets were dangerous, especially if they involved questions of rightful heirs and lineages that challenged the entire foundation of the rebellion. As the years went by, Ned's children grew. He arranged for them to visit the capital when it was safer so they might know their father better, though they still spent most of their time in the north with Catelyn. Robb was growing into a strong boy, trained in swordplay by Ser Roderick Castle, but he looked at King's Landing with hesitant eyes, as though the city were a place of illusions. Sansa, enamored by the tales of gallant knights and ladies, found the capital enchanting at first. She was eager to see the bustling markets, the Red Keep's grand halls, and the tournaments that were sometimes held to commemorate the new king's edicts. Arya, on the other hand, was less taken with courtly life. She found the manners stifling, the dresses itchy, and she spent much of her time sneaking off to watch the castle guards train. Little Bran, still too young to understand, clung to his mother's skirts, wide-eyed at the monstrous Iron Throne and the swirl of courtiers in their silks and velvets. King Eddard's extended family at court was not large, but it did include Robert Baratheon, who had made a near-complete recovery but would bear a scar on his side for life. Robert chafed at his diminished stature, once imagining himself as the realm's savior king, only to be overshadowed by the quiet wolf from the north. In the beginning, Robert's envy threatened to fester. But Ned, with his measured kindness, took Robert's counsel on certain matters of war and defense, allowing him to influence decisions that kept the realm secure. The two men would sometimes laugh together as they had in their youth, but the shadow of Lyanna still lingered. In those moments of nostalgia, both felt the ache of what had been lost. Meanwhile, Tyrion Lannister, Tywin's youngest son, had made his way to King's Landing. A clever dwarf with a sharp tongue, Tyrion spent his days in the royal library devouring histories and treatises on governance, war, and the nature of dragons. He developed a respectful, if not warm, relationship with the king, for Ned valued a sharp mind even if it came from a Lannister. Tyrion's presence gave the small council a flavor of wit and intelligence that Ned sorely needed amid the stodgy politics of the capital. Yet Tywin's other children, Jaime, the Kingslayer, and Cersei, a woman of cool beauty, were less trusted by the king. Jaime remained in the king's guard at Ned's insistence, though it grated on both men. Cersei was rumored to nurse ambitions for herself, but with Ned upon the throne, those ambitions had no easy avenue. The alliance Tywin Lannister had hoped for never fully materialized. For a time, it seemed the realm might finally know a lasting peace. The harvests improved, coin flowed through the port of King's Landing, and the roads were patrolled by royal guards who kept bandits at bay. Yet no king can rule without conflict forever, and Ned soon discovered that peace can be as fragile as winter ice. A letter arrived from the Wall, carried by a courier rather than a raven, for the blackbirds often found themselves lost in storms or shot by passing wildlings. The Night's Watch had urgent news, wildling raids were on the rise, and rumors spoke of unnatural creatures prowling the haunted forests beyond the Wall. The Watch was understaffed and underfunded, neglected by a realm preoccupied with more immediate concerns. Ned read the letter in silence, recalling his youthful visits to the Wall, where he had once seen the ice stretch to the horizon, a vast barrier between the realm and the unknown. He brought the matter to the small council, but many scoffed. The tales of grumpkins and snarks, they said, always cropped up. The Watch was prone to exaggeration, seeking gold and supplies they did not truly need. But Ned knew better than to dismiss the pleas of the Night's Watch. He remembered old stories told around the hearth in Winterfell, stories of the Long Night and the White Walkers. Though centuries had passed without such horrors, one could not forget them entirely. Jon Arryn, ever the pragmatic hand of the king, advised sending a modest host of soldiers north to bolster the Watch. Others argued the crown could not afford it. In the end, Ned compromised. He agreed to send gold for more provisions and some skilled builders to help repair the crumbling castles along the Wall, but not a full contingent of royal soldiers. He prayed that would suffice. Deep in his heart, however, a disquiet took root. News from Dorne also demanded attention. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, had gained a loyal following among young, hot-headed knights in Sunspear. Rumors said he was training an elite group of spearmen, swearing oaths of vengeance for Elia Martell's death. To quell the unrest, Ned dispatched envoys bearing gifts of gold and fruit from the Reach, as well as a personal letter penned in his own hand. He wrote of unity, of the desire to move beyond the horrors of the rebellion. He offered to host a grand tournament in King's Landing where the Martells could showcase their prowess, and hopefully that spectacle would soothe old grudges. In truth, it was a gamble. Tournaments could unite or inflame rivalries, but Ned felt it was worth trying. If the Dornish refused to attend, at least he could say he had reached out. More personal drama also simmered. Robert, in a moment of drunken confession, admitted to Ned that he feared he would never regain his full strength. The knowledge galled him. He was a warrior, a man who had crushed Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident, driven by the memory of his lost love, Lyanna. Now he lived in the shadow of a friend who sat the throne he once coveted. He drank too much, caroused with women, and grew resentful. Ned tried to counsel him, to remind him of the days they sparred in the Vale, how Robert had always bested him in feats of arms. But Robert's bitterness could not be fully soothed by memories. Soon, rumors of Robert's affairs spread through the court. He sired bastards, black-haired infants that would appear in the city's poorer districts, living testament to the restless spirit of the one-time warrior. Ned confronted him quietly, urging him to show more restraint, but the truth was that Robert felt caged. Without a war to fight, he fought himself and the emptiness he could not name. Despite these tensions, the smallfolk still lauded Ned Stark as a just king. He decreed punishments for crimes both high and low, but rarely inflicted cruelty. Tales spread of how he listened patiently to peasants' complaints, how he walked among them during certain feasts, asking about their hardships. This was a far cry from the aloof Targaryen kings who had once ruled behind thick walls and dragon dreams. The people of King's Landing, ever hungry for a good story, christened him the Stark King, a sober man of the north unafraid to get mud on his boots. For those starved of moral leadership, Ned's presence was a welcome relief. Yet even the best of kings can face unforeseen tragedies. A bitter winter descended upon Westeros several years into Ned's reign, as the maesters had predicted. Snow fell even in the Crownlands, blanketing the red-tiled roofs of King's Landing in a pale hush. The roads became treacherous, wagons unable to traverse the mountainous passes. Famine threatened the outskirts of the realm. Ned did his best to organize grain shipments and encourage the major houses to release their stored harvests. In the north, Winterfell was accustomed to storing provisions, but some southern lords did not heed the warnings. The result was a spike in starving smallfolk traveling toward the capital in search of bread. Disease soon followed in the cramped conditions of the city. Outbreaks of fever took many lives, and the royal coffers strained to provide relief. One frosty morning, Grand Maester Pycelle informed Ned of a chilling rumor. House Greyjoy might be planning open rebellion, while the kingdom's attention was diverted by winter. With sea lanes clogged by ice in the north, the Ironborn could raid almost uncontested. The Westerland's fleet was limited, and Stannis was forced to keep many ships in the Stepstones to ward off pirates. Reluctantly, Ned arranged for 1,000 men to be stationed along the western coasts, under the command of a trusted knight, Ser Brynden Tully, known as the Blackfish. This left fewer soldiers to keep order in the Crownlands and deter bandits on the roads leading to King's Landing. Tension mounted. Every raven seemed to bring tidings of raids, lost merchant ships, or local uprisings. The weariness of rule bore down on Ned, and the crown felt heavier each day. Meanwhile, the seeds of conflict within the capital continued to sprout. Tywin Lannister bristled at the continued overshadowing of his family's ambitions. Jaime served as a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, which many believed tarnished the White Cloak due to his regicide. Cersei, still unwed, was an object of speculation at court. Some whispered that she hoped to ensnare Robert Baratheon, but Robert's roving eye took him in too many directions to be pinned down. Tyrion occasionally joined the king in the library, offering sardonic commentary on the realm's politics. Though Ned found him intriguing, the match between the Lannisters and the Starks remained uneasy. Tywin's gold was needed to stabilize the kingdom's finances, but Ned refused to pay undue favors for it. As the cold deepened, Ned received word that Catelyn and the children had been delayed on their journey south. He had invited them to escape the harshness of the northern winter by spending time at the royal court, but fierce blizzards had stranded them near Moat Cailin. Ned's worry gnawed at him. He trusted in the loyalty of his northern bannermen, but the roads were perilous in winter. Wolves and wild beasts roamed nearer to human settlements, and brigands were never far behind. Unable to leave the capital himself, Ned sent a contingent of knights north to escort his family safely. Letters exchanged across the miles told him that Robb was growing tall, that Bran had begun climbing the walls of Winterfell with a fearlessness that troubled his mother, that Arya was still wild and headstrong. Each detail filled Ned with longing to hold his children close, but the king's duty chained him to the throne. In the midst of that grim winter, a strange visitor arrived at court, a red-robed priestess from the distant lands of Asai. She was called Melisandre, a name that sounded like embers. She claimed to serve the Lord of Light, a foreign god many in Westeros viewed with suspicion. Yet she walked into the throne room with an air of uncanny confidence, her red hair gleaming like hot coals, and proclaimed that darkness was stirring in the far north beyond the wall. She spoke of an ancient enemy, a night that would not end. Many courtiers mocked her warnings, calling her a foreign witch. But Ned listened gravely. He asked if she had come to warn him, to offer her visions. She spoke cryptically of a promised prince, of flames in the snow, of a dire wolf crowned in red. Her riddles unsettled Ned, for they reminded him of the old stories about the White Walkers. Yet he could not fully trust her. She was an unknown variable in a court already rife with intrigue. That winter at King's Landing tested Ned's resolve in every possible way. Disease gnawed at the slums of Fleet Bottom, bandits crept along the roads, Iron-born raids burned fishing villages along the coasts, and rumors from Dorne suggested Oberyn Martell might be preparing a formal protest, or perhaps something far more drastic. Still, Ned labored on, his sense of honor guiding him through each trial. He convened with the small council nearly every morning, hearing reports from Varys about the shifting alliances at court, from Littlefinger about the crown's finances, from Pycelle about the health of the city. Often, their voices overlapped in heated discussion, and Ned felt the pounding in his temples like war drums. On the rare evenings when he could find a moment's peace, Ned would ascend the ramparts of the Red Keep, looking north across the city. The lights of the capital flickered below like fallen stars, and a cold wind brushed his cheeks, carrying the faint taste of salt from the bay. He thought of Winterfell's walls, of the solitary cry of a wolf echoing through dark forests, of the crypts where his forefathers rested in somber silence. He had never wanted the Iron Throne, never thirsted for power or glory. But it was his, and he would bear it until the gods or death relieved him of that charge. And so he stood, silent in the winter darkness, with the swirl of snow drifting about him, a lone figure grappling with the enormity of a kingdom's burdens. The break in the winter's fury did not come until late the following year. The snows receded, the roads cleared. Markets reopened, and ships once more sailed in and out of the harbor. A sense of cautious relief spread through King's Landing. Farmers ventured back to their fields, fishermen cast their nets, and merchants arrived from Essos with exotic goods. Yet in that lull, the seeds of conflict had only grown stronger beneath the snow. Word reached the Red Keep that Balon Greyjoy had declared himself King of the Isles, raising his banner on pike. He had gathered the captains of the Iron Islands to his cause, proclaiming that the Ironborn would no longer bend the knee to a northern king who did not understand the sea. Rebellion had reared its head once again. Ned gathered his council, forced to decide how to respond. War would mean bloodshed and the risk of spreading the realm's forces thin. Yet failing to respond would invite every disgruntled lord to raise his own banners. The memory of the Targaryen downfall loomed. Power, once questioned, could unravel swiftly. In the end, Ned made the hard choice. The crown would not allow the Iron Islands to secede. He mustered a royal fleet under Stannis and prepared to lead a host of loyal lords westward. The realm braced for another conflict. As preparations for war churned, Oberyn Martell arrived unexpectedly at King's Landing. He came at the head of a small retinue of Dornish knights, all clad in light armor and bearing spears and suns emblazoned on their chests. Their arrival caused a stir in the capital. Had they come to declare for House Stark against the Greyjoys? Or to pick a fight of their own? Ned received Oberyn in the throne room. The Dornish prince's dark eyes gleamed with challenge. He spoke of the death of his sister Elia, how her children were slaughtered, how the Lannisters' role was never fully accounted for. Then, to Ned's surprise, Oberyn bent the knee, albeit with a trace of bitterness in his voice, and pledged his allegiance to King Eddard Stark so long as justice was served. Ned sensed the demand hidden in that pledge, the punishment of those responsible for Elia's murder, men like Tywin's bannermen. It was a delicate matter, for vengeance for a crime committed under the banner of war might unravel alliances. Still, Ned had always vowed to uphold justice, and so he told Oberyn he would do all in his power to see crimes punished and wrongdoing righted. Whether the promise was hollow or real, only time would reveal. Amid these swirling crises, the realm learned that Robert Baratheon, once a towering figure of muscle and bravado, had ridden forth from King's Landing with a small group of loyal men. He claimed he sought a worthy fight in the west against the Ironborn to regain some measure of his former glory. Ned tried to dissuade him, reminding him that the wounds he bore could still hamper him. But Robert had the same wild fire in his eyes he had shown at the Trident, a yearning for the thrill of combat. He departed the city in a thunder of hooves, leaving Ned with an uneasy heart. The passing of winter had not brought peace. It had brought a new chapter of conflict. As King Eddard Stark prepared to lead his armies west, he wrote one final letter to Catelyn, who had just arrived in King's Landing with their children. He expressed regret that duty called him away before he could truly welcome them to the capital. Catelyn, ever dutiful, would manage the royal household in his absence, a role she had not envisioned when she married the second son of Lord Rickard Stark so many years ago. She was uneasy about the safety of their children in the city, but Ned reassured her, trusting in Jon Arryn and the guards he had personally vetted. The war horn blew and the city streets echoed with the tramp of soldiers. Banners bearing the direwolf of House Stark, the fish of House Tully, the Moonan falcon of House Arryn, and the son of Dorne unfurled in the spring breeze. The realm's might assembled at the gates, forming ranks of knights, archers, and mounted lords. Ned donned armor of dark steel, the same set he had worn during the rebellion, though now it was fitted with the embellishments of a king. He did not relish war, but neither could he shirk from it. And so the host marched, leaving behind the Red Keep's battlements. The common folk lined the streets, cheering their king and his lords, though many wore anxious faces. War might begin as a distant rumor, but soon spread sorrow like ink spilled on a map. As Ned looked back at the capital one last time, he saw the Iron Throne's silhouette through an open window, a reminder of the seat he occupied but had never truly craved. The throne seemed to glare, a twisted monument of conquest that demanded constant sacrifice. Ned urged his horse forward, joining the march to the west where Balon Greyjoy's rebellion awaited. The journey across the King's Road took weeks. Even as spring melted the snows, the roads were full of mud and progress was slow. The men grew restless and supplies had to be carefully rationed. Lads fresh from the winter's pinch joked nervously about the glory they would earn, while the veteran knights eyed the skies for omens of storms. On the horizon, the coast awaited them, a place of rocky cliffs and surging waves. Rumors spoke of Ironborn longships prowling the waters, landing raiding parties at night to burn villages. The local lords greeted King Eddard's forces with both relief and trepidation. War had come again, so soon after the rebellion. At last, the army stood poised. Ed near Seaguard, a strategic port in the Riverlands that had often faced Ironborn incursions. There, Ned conferred with Ser Brynden Tully and other commanders, sketching out a plan to blockade Pike and the surrounding Isle Stannis Baratheon. Leading the royal fleet would choke off the Ironborn at sea, while Ned's forces would strike any raiding parties that dared venture inland. Balon Greyjoy, however, was no fool. He had prepared his defenses well, relying on the treacherous seas and the labyrinthine coasts of the Iron Islands. The campaign would not be swift. As the first clashes erupted on the beaches and in the shallow waters, Robert Baratheon distinguished himself with a fury reminiscent of his younger days. Wielding a warhammer once again, he led a charge that drove the Ironborn from a small fishing village. His men said that the old Robert was back, if only for a moment, the roar of battle giving him renewed purpose. Ned, meanwhile, directed the main army with a cool head. He had no lust for blood, but he knew that if the rebellion was not quelled, the realm would fragment. The Ironborn reavers fought fiercely, chanting their drowned gods' prayers even as they clashed swords with the king's men. The beaches turned crimson with gore. For weeks, the fighting dragged on. The Ironborn harried supply lines, launching sudden raids under the cover of dusk. In response, Ned ordered the construction of watchtowers along the coastline and demanded tighter patrols. Yet the advantage gradually swung to the Crown's forces. One by one, the lesser islands fell under blockade. At last, the royal fleet, commanded by Stannis, encircled Pike itself. Massive siege engines arrived by ship, though it was a logistical nightmare to land and assemble them on the rocky shores. The storm-lashed fortress of House Greyjoy loomed atop rugged cliffs, defiant against the pounding surf. Balon Greyjoy refused calls to surrender. "What is dead may never die," his warriors shouted from the battlements. Ned recognized they were prepared to fight to the last man. The final assault came at dawn, the sky streaked with pink and purple. Under cover of archers and catapult volleys, ladders were raised against the wet stone walls. Soldiers scrambled up amidst scalding oil poured by the defenders. The surf roared below, claiming those who slipped or were struck by arrows. Robert, eager to prove his mettle, led a vanguard that forced open a sally port, but he was gravely wounded in the process, an iron-borne axe biting deep into his thigh. Ned had him carried to safety, though Robert protested, cursing at the men who pulled him away from the fight. Fierce hand-to-hand combat raged in the courtyards of Pike. The clang of steel, the screams of the dying, and the thunder of the waves all mixed into a symphony of chaos. Ned found himself locked in a duel with an iron-born captain who cursed the Wolf King for daring to rule a people of the sea. Their blades met in furious sparks before Ned delivered a decisive stroke, ending the man's life. At last, the battered gates of the keep were breached and royal soldiers poured in. Balon Greyjoy was cornered in his hall, still clad in salt-stained armor. He sneered at the notion of bending the knee. Only when his sons were dragged before him in chains did his resolve crumble. To spare their lives, he finally yielded. The war was ended, but the cost weighed heavily on Ned's conscience. Bodies littered the beaches and towns burned to ash on the fringes of the islands. In the aftermath, Ned decreed that the Greyjoys would retain their lordship of the Iron Islands, but only upon swearing fealty anew to the crown and offering hostages to guarantee peace. Balon's heirs would be taken to King's Landing to be raised under the king's eye, a common practice to ensure good behavior. The Ironborn who had participated in raids were stripped of their ships and forced to pay restitution to the coastal villages they ravaged. It was a stern peace, though not as crushing as it might have been had another man sat the throne. Some of the Ironborn, bitter at their defeat, whispered that Eddard Stark was weak for allowing them to live at all. Others begrudgingly respected him for sparing their lives. Robert Baratheon's wound, however, festered. When Ned visited him in the healer's tent, he found Robert pale and sweating, delirious once again as he had been after the trident. The healers shook their heads, uncertain if the infection would subside. The memory of losing Lyanna returned to Ned with icy clarity. Was he doomed to lose his dear friend as well? He prayed over Robert's bedside, cursing this wretched war and the necessity that had dragged them all into it. If only there were a gentler way to rule, a gentler way to keep the realm intact. But the reality of kingship was harsh and unforgiving. The Ironborn rebellion concluded, Ned led the victorious host back to the mainland. Balon Greyjoy's submission was guaranteed by the presence of his heirs who rode under guard, their heads bowed in sullen silence. At first, the journey home was subdued. Soldiers carried wounded comrades in wagons, the stench of death and infection still clinging to them. A funeral pyre was prepared for the fallen knights, their names recorded so that their families might receive word. Ned rode at the forefront, feeling neither triumph nor glory, only weariness. It was not until the banners of House Tully, House Arryn, and House Stark parted ways, each returning to its domain, that Ned finally turned his eyes toward King's Landing once more. The capital beckoned him back, with its politics and intrigues, its responsibilities and dangers. Rumors had preceded him, the Dornish were stirring again, Tywin Lannister had grown resentful of how the war had been funded, and there was an unsettling report from the Wall about whites in the forest. Ned felt the swirl of burdens accumulate once more. He was king by circumstance, by necessity, but the realm did not pause in its demands. Duty weighed on him like the crown upon his brow, unrelenting. So it was that Eddard Stark, the Winter King, returned to the Red Keep amidst the cheers of the crowd who hailed him as the conqueror of the Ironborn. The reality of war's ugliness remained hidden behind polished armor and well-tailored cloaks. The small folk saw only their king returning in triumph. They shouted his name, tossed flowers in the streets, and hoisted children on their shoulders to catch a glimpse of the solemn-faced monarch. It was a grand display, but Ned's heart felt heavy with the knowledge of what it had cost. As he rode beneath the towering Barbican gates, he realized, not for the first time, that the realm was a living beast, its appetite for blood and gold never sated. A righteous man could be devoured by it, or he could stand firm and try to guide it onto a path of decency. Ned swore to do the latter, even if it cost him everything. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of addresses, ceremonies, and councils. Ned had to formally accept the hostages from House Greyjoy, hear their oaths of fealty, and declare an end to the rebellion. Robert was carried into the Red Keep, wounded but still alive, though his healing would be long. The lords of the realm gathered to celebrate the victory, feasting in the Great Hall. Wine flowed, minstrels sang, and the tension of war gave way to raucous merriment. Yet Ned, seated on the Iron Throne with his guests arrayed around him, wore a subdued expression. He thanked the men for their courage, honored the fallen with respectful words, and did his best to appear the magnanimous king. But in his private thoughts, he worried about the next threat. Peace in Westeros, it seemed, was always fleeting. True to form, trouble brewed swiftly. Oberyn Martell, having stayed in King's Landing during the campaign, grew restless. He demanded answers about the Lannisters' role in his sister's death. Tywin, for his part, refused to be questioned as though he were a common criminal. The atmosphere in court grew charged like the air before a thunderstorm. Ned intervened, promising Oberyn a thorough investigation, a pledge he intended to keep. But justice in matters of war often proves elusive, and Ned knew he was juggling wildfire. If he pushed Tywin too hard without irrefutable evidence, the West might rise in anger. If he did nothing, Dorne might seek vengeance on its own. And so, the seeds of further discord were sown. Caught in the midst of it all was Ned's family. Catelyn, strong and composed, managed the royal household with the dignity she had learned at Riverrun. Robb, almost a young man now, looked on with a mixture of awe and confusion as he stood by his father's side. Sansa found the courtly intrigues both fascinating and frightening, while Arya bristled under the proper manners expected of a king's daughter. Bran, still too young to grasp the complexities, ran about the castle's corridors, wide-eyed at the grandeur. Ned wished he could whisk them all away to Winterfell, where life was simpler, but that possibility was as remote as a southern summer snow. He had a realm to rule, and the North, for now, would have to remain a distant dream. Late one night, after a day of fruitless negotiation between Oberyn and Tywin's envoys, Ned wandered into the Godwood. He found the heart tree dappled by moonlight, its carved face expressionless and silent. He laid his sword down and knelt in the damp grass, closing his eyes. In the quiet of the capital's sleeping hours, he prayed for wisdom, for the strength to see the realm through another round of turmoil without succumbing to the tyrannies and cruelties that had defined the Mad King's reign. He prayed for his children's futures, that they might grow to inherit a kingdom not defined by endless war. And he prayed for Robert, whose health still hung in precarious balance. His words dissolved into the rustling leaves, which whispered secrets only the old gods might understand. For a moment, Ned felt an echo of Winterfell's chill, the memory of a place where honor was straightforward. A man passed the sentence and swung the sword. Here, in King's Landing, the sword was metaphorical more often than not, and the sentences were tangled in webs of alliances and ancient grudges. Yet Ned Stark did not waver. He rose slowly, reclaiming his sword, and walked back through the dark corridors of the Red Keep, the faint torchlight flickering against the stone walls. Dawn would come soon, and with it more demands, more dilemmas, and the weight of a crown upon his head. But he would face it because that was what honor required. The realm unknowingly balanced on the edge of a blade. Winter had tested it, rebellion had scarred it, and shadows of old dynasties loomed across the sea. Yet it endured, held together by the quiet resolve of a king who had never sought his crown. Whether the resolve would be enough to see Westeros into a new age of peace was a question only time and the gods could answer. Ned Stark rose before the sun the day after he visited the Godwood. The hours of night had offered little rest, his dreams crowded by flickering images of Pike's towering cliffs, a roiling black sea, and the memory of Robert bleeding on the beach. He had woken more than once in a cold sweat, reaching instinctively for a sword that was not there. Now, in the dim hush of his bedchamber, he dressed with careful efficiency. The realm seemed to breathe differently after victory against the Ironborn, yet he felt no lightness, no sense of true accomplishment. If anything, he saw the weight of his crown more clearly than ever, like a shadow that would follow him to his grave. He left Catelyn still abed. She stirred only once, murmuring a question he could not discern, then slipped back into the fragile peace of sleep. He envied her momentarily. They had spoken late into the night. She worried over their children, about the dangers in King's Landing, about Oberyn Martell's fury, Tywin Lannister's pride, and Robert Baratheon's uncertain fate. But Ned had no ready answers. The best he could do was promise that he would shoulder his responsibilities and that he would try somehow to forge stability from the chaos swirling at court. After pressing a gentle kiss to her hair, he departed, leaving only a single candle burning on the bedside table. In the corridor, the Red Keep was still drowsy. A pair of Lannister guards nodded as he passed, their crimson cloaks seeming incongruous in this place that was now ruled by a man of the North. Ned offered a curt greeting but did not linger. Beyond the guards, sunlight began to glow through the high windows, illuminating dust motes drifting in the air. He heard the distant clank of armor and the soft shuffle of servants preparing fires in the larger halls. Already, the city awoke in layered notes, the caw of gulls by the harbor, the rumble of carts on cobblestones, and somewhere far off, the crowing of roosters in cramped city yards. King's Landing was stirring, and with it came another day of subtle wars. He made his way to Robert's chambers first. The door stood ajar, and inside the dimly lit room he found Grand Maester Pycelle fussing with cloth bandages. The thick smell of medicinal herbs hung in the air, mingling with something sharp, perhaps vinegar or wine. Robert lay on the bed, his leg propped on pillows. The wound in his thigh was still angry and raw, refusing to heal as swiftly as any of them had hoped. He opened one eye when Ned entered, his face contorting into something between a scowl and a smile. "So the valiant king pays me a visit," Robert muttered. His voice was husky, as though it had been wrung through 100 battles. "Come to see if I'm dead yet?" "I came to see how my friend fares," Ned answered in a low tone, stepping closer. "Grand Maester, may I have a moment?" Pycelle bowed stiffly, his chains rattling. "Of course, your grace. I'll return in a short while with another poultice." With that he left the two men alone. Ned approached the bedside, lowering his voice further. "How do you truly feel?" Robert barked a humorless laugh. "As though the drowned god himself has taken an axe to my thigh and is twisting it daily. Bloody Ironborn. That last strike was a good one. I can still feel how deep it bit." A silent moment passed as Ned considered what to say. He could not reassure Robert with false hope. He knew too well that some wounds lingered for a lifetime. "Let the maester tend to it properly. We can't have you pushing yourself too soon." Robert's eyes flickered with anger, or perhaps frustration. "I've pushed myself all my life, Ned. Fought in wars, chased foes, stormed castles. Now I'm laid low by some nameless Ironborn. Not even one of Balan's spawn. Just a reaver with more courage than brains. The fact it's taking so long to heal, it galls me." Ned placed a steady hand on Robert's forearm. "You're alive, Robert. That's what matters. Once your strength returns, the realm will have need of you again." "Need of me?" Robert let out a ragged breath. "You're king, Ned. The realm needs you. I'm just the wounded friend, the old warhammer that's gone dull." Ned's heart clenched at the bitterness in Robert's tone. "You were never just a weapon. Don't say that. You have a place here if you'll have it." Robert closed his eyes, perhaps to hide emotion that threatened to surface. Well, I'll think on it." Then he forced a short laugh, opening his eyes again. "Anyway, enough gloom. Tell me something of the court. Are they all prancing and toasting your glorious victory over the Ironborn, or have they turned to infighting already?" Ned hesitated. The truth was not easily painted in cheerful colors. Oberyn Martell demands justice for his sister Elia. Tywin Lannister resents being singled out, though we both know who loosed the mountain on Elia and her children. I'm trying to find a path that won't tear the realm apart, but it grows more difficult by the day." Robert grunted. "I'd have half a mind to let them kill each other if it didn't imperil everyone else. Tywin's men butchered Elia and her babes, no question of that. It's not as if Tywin personally swung the sword, but it was his banner all the same." "That's what Oberyn says," Ned agreed quietly. "And he won't rest until Tywin pays in some form or another." Robert turned his head on the pillow, staring at the shuttered window. "What would you do, Ned, if it were your sister? If justice could only be served by striking at a great lord?" Ned had asked himself that question 100 times since Oberyn arrived. "I would want justice," he admitted, "but I would also try to prevent a war." Then he exhaled, standing straight. "Your rest is more important right now. I'll keep you informed." Robert nodded, exhaustion creeping into his features. "I do that. And, Ned, try not to let Oberyn slip a poisoned spear into Tywin's belly while I'm stuck in this damn bed. As entertaining as that might be, I'd rather not see the Seven Kingdoms burn." Ned forced a slight smile. "I'll do my best." He clasped Robert's hand briefly, then turned to leave, passing Pycelle on the way out. The Grand Maester bustled in, carrying a bowl of pungent salve. A part of Ned wondered if these treatments truly helped or if Pycelle merely liked appearing busy. Still, he had no time to dwell on such doubts. His next destination was the council chamber. Sunlight now streamed through the windows of the Red Keep, and servants were lighting candles and braziers in the corridors, more for ceremonial brightness than for heat. A scattering of knights and courtiers paused to bow or curtsy as Ned passed. Their eyes held guarded respect, as though still trying to gauge what manner of ruler he might be in the long run. He offered polite nods, his pace unhurried. If he learned anything from his father's generation, it was that a king who appeared frantic caused more fear than confidence. So he walked with composure, letting the tension coil inside him without showing it on his face. The council chamber was a large rectangular room with a long oak table polished to a gleam. At one end stood a high-backed chair bearing the direwolf sigil inlaid with silver. Even after all this time, Ned found it strange to see his family's symbol in a place once dominated by the dragons of Targaryen rule. The other chairs were arranged for the members of the small council. Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, Stannis Baratheon, Master of Ships, Peter Baelish, Master of Coin, Varys, the Master of Whisperers, and Grand Maester Pycelle, who would arrive after tending to Robert. A few empty chairs were spaced around, should other lords or advisors be called to attend. Jon Arryn was already seated, reading a parchment by the light of an iron candelabrum. The older man glanced up as Ned entered, his blue eyes warm with welcome. "Your Grace," he said softly, rising to bow. "You needn't bow to me," Ned replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. "We've known each other far too long for such formality." "It's proper," Jon said with a hint of a smile, "but I'm happy to dispense with it in private." He set the parchment aside. "You look troubled." Ned folded his hands on the table. "Do I? Then my mask is slipping. I saw Robert. He's in pain, but he'll live, God's willing." He paused, considering how to phrase his concerns. "Jon, this situation with Oberyn and Tywin is a storm waiting to break. One or the other will do something rash if I don't find a solution soon." Jon steepled his fingers. "Indeed, I spoke with Oberyn yesterday. He's adamant that someone must answer for Elaya's murder. Years of seething hatred do not vanish with a few diplomatic words. He demands that Gregor Clegane and those W.H.O. acted under Lannister orders be brought to trial. He might even settle for their executions without an open trial, though that would be precarious." Ned nodded slowly. "We'd need proof, of course. The realm's memory says Tywin ordered the mountain to do it, but Tywin denies giving such an order. Without direct evidence, convicting him or his men will be near impossible. Yet if we do nothing, Dorne will never be at peace." Jon frowned. "Have you spoken to Tywin directly?" "Not yet. I doubt he'll be eager to meet me privately. So far, he's communicated through letters, refusing all blame and stating that the horrors of war cannot be pinned on a single house. That is not untrue, but neither does it absolve them." Before Jon could reply, the door opened and in strode Stannis Baratheon. He wore the expression of a man who perpetually tasted something bitter. His black hair and short-cropped beard framed a face etched with stern lines as though joy had been carved away from him long ago. "Your Grace," he said, offering a stiff bow before seating himself. "I trust you're well." "As well as can be expected," Ned said. "You've heard about Oberyn Martell and Tywin Lannister?" Stannis nodded curtly. "I have. Let them face each other in combat if they wish rather than drag the realm into war. It'd be simpler." Jon Arryn sighed. "Simpler, perhaps, but hardly honorable nor guaranteed to resolve the deeper feud. The Martells want the truth and retribution. A single duel might only inflame matters if the result is unsatisfying." Stannis drummed his gauntlet fingers on the table. "I suppose you're right. Any sign the Martells are moving beyond talk?" Jon shook his head. "Only rumors. Spies say Oberyn has been meeting with certain hedge knights in King's Landing, possibly hoping to recruit them for some private vendetta. But we've no proof of anything more." Ned looked to Stannis. "And your brother, he's still in bed, but his mind is restless. I worry what will happen if Robert decides to champion Oberyn's cause out of some misguided loyalty to Elia as a Targaryen hostage. He loathes the Lannisters enough to do something rash, especially in his current state." Stannis's jaw tightened. "Robert has never been one for caution. But we must trust he won't light another war." Peter Baelish arrived next, slipping in with a sly smile, his fine clothing tailored to perfection. "Your Grace, Lord Arryn, Lord Stannis," he greeted. "I'm sure we're discussing the Martell Lannister predicament, yes?" Ned nodded but did not return the smile. He often found Littlefinger's manner unsettling, always too amused, as if he danced on the edge of a private joke. "We are. Delicate business," Baelish said, taking a seat and drumming his slender fingers on the tabletop. "The Red Viper will not be placated with a few gold dragons or empty words, and Tywin is prouder than any man alive. Unless we produce the mountain's head on a platter or some equally dramatic show, I suspect Oberyn will keep pushing." A precarious spot indeed. Ned's lips thinned. "I'd rather not stage an execution without due trial, but if Tywin won't even permit an inquiry, we're trapped." Littlefinger tilted his head. "An inquiry could be arranged, but Tywin would see it as an insult. He might bring half the West to King's Landing in protest." Ned considered the bleak possibilities. "We may need to approach this carefully. Perhaps we can invite Tywin here with the promise of open talks. If I make it clear that it's not an inquisition but a chance to clear the air, he might come. If Oberyn sees we're at least trying to find the truth, maybe that forestalls open conflict. Jon Arryn cleared his throat. One problem, Tywin is said to be at Casterly Rock, consolidating his power after the war with the Ironborn. He's also dealing with issues in the Westerlands, banditry, discontent from increased taxes. He may refuse any summons. Stannis let out a grunt. Then we'll go to him. The king traveling west could be seen as a gesture of respect. But it's risky with the capital in such a fragile state. Ned grimaced. 1,000 troubles with no easy answer. But we cannot let this fester. And I must remain in King's Landing for now, at least until Robert recovers enough to do something. The city needs a firm hand. Littlefinger's grin sharpened. Well, we might try a more subtle approach. Lure Tywin with an event he can't ignore. A grand tournament, perhaps? We nearly held one before the war with the Ironborn began. If we resurrect that plan, touted as a celebration of House Stark's victory and a chance for knights to win glory, Tywin might bring Lannister champions. Oberyn could also field his own men. It might be a spectacle, but it'd give us the opportunity to gather everyone in one place and hopefully negotiate in private while the crowds watch the jousting. Ned mulled over the idea. Tournaments often drained the treasury, something they could hardly afford, but Littlefinger had a knack for conjuring coin out of shadowy ledgers. We'd need funds. And more importantly, we'd need to ensure no blood feud erupts on the lists. Jon Arryn frowned. Tournaments are flashy, yes, but they can also stoke rivalries. If Oberyn sees a Lannister in the tilt, he might take it as an invitation to kill them. Or the Lannisters might plan some accident. Still, Stannis admitted it might be our best chance to bring them both to the table without it seeming like a summons. Tywin loves flaunting the prowess of his house. Oberyn would relish the chance to prove Dornish valor. Ned rubbed the bridge of his nose. Let's keep that as an option. For now, see if you can assess the cost, Peter. And I'd like to know Oberyn's stance, whether he'd consent to that. If he refuses, it's a moot point. Littlefinger bowed his head. As you command, your grace. I'll have estimates by the morrow. They continued discussing logistics, disposition of troops, updates on the Iron Islands, news from the north. Occasionally, the conversation veered toward the crown's finances, which were still perilously low. Peter Baelish insisted he had arrangements that would secure loans from the Iron Bank or wealthier Tyroshi magisters, but Ned felt uneasy about chaining the realm's future to foreign debt. And yet, the necessity of gold reared its head at every turn, rebuilding roads, repairing the damage from war, feeding the impoverished after the harsh winter. Each cost loomed, and the treasury's coffers seemed alarmingly thin. By the time the meeting adjourned, midday light streamed through the windows, and a faint breeze from Blackwater Bay carried the tang of salt. Ned lingered behind as the others departed, gathering his papers. Jon Arryn paused at the door. There's another matter, Ned, he said quietly, eyes flicking toward the corridor to ensure privacy. A rumor, really, but Varys mentioned it to me. Ned waited. What is it? Jon lowered his voice. Something about Targaryen loyalists in the city. Not many, but a small group. They might be trying to make contact with Viserys across the Narrow Sea. Nothing concrete, but if it's true, we must be cautious. Ned's shoulders tightened. Yes. Cautious indeed. The last thing we need is Targaryen embers flaring into a blaze. If you learn anything more, let me know immediately. Jon nodded. I will. Then he left, leaving Ned alone in the chamber. The possibility of hidden Targaryen loyalists was no surprise. The old dynasty had ruled for nearly 3 centuries. Some families still carried a torch for the Dragon Kings, longing for their return. But with Viserys and Daenerys fled to Essos, that threat seemed distant until now. If some cunning faction was funneling resources or sending coded messages, they might stir up rebellion from within. Ned could not allow that. He thought of the horrors committed under Aerys II, of how Rhaegar's abduction of Lyanna had sparked the rebellion. No, he would not see the realm descend into that madness again. He tried to push the worry aside as he gathered his papers and left the chamber. His next obligation was to meet with a delegation from the Reach, men loyal to Mace Tyrell. They wanted the king's assistance in improving trade routes along the Rose Road, which had been badly damaged during the war. Another expense. Another headache. Ned squared his shoulders and continued down the hall, a solitary figure in a place that still felt alien. The corridors around him were hung with tapestries depicting Targaryen conquests. They had not yet been replaced, though Ned sometimes thought about taking them down. He never did. Perhaps part of him felt the realm should not forget the past, for both its glories and its sins. Outside the Solar, the Tyrell men waited 2 minor lords and a steward. They bowed low, uttering pleasantries and offering elaborate compliments. Ned guided them in, listening as they presented charts of damaged roads, battered bridges, and villages that needed royal support. Beneath the flowery words, Ned sensed a veiled demand. The Tyrells wanted to ensure their region prospered, and they wanted the crown to foot the bill. Still, their requests were not without merit. The roads connected Highgarden to King's Landing, essential for trade. If they fell to ruin, the capital would suffer as well. He promised a measured allocation of funds, conditional on the Tyrells matching a portion of the cost themselves. The negotiations stretched for nearly an hour, with the lords occasionally glancing at one another in frustration. But Ned stood firm. He had learned that a king who handed out gold without conditions soon found himself empty-handed. By the time the audience concluded, they agreed to a rough plan, a shared expense for reconstruction, half from Highgarden's coffers and half from the crown's, with a possibility of partial repayment through future tariffs on goods passing through the region. Peter Baelish would be the one to handle the details, much as Ned disliked entrusting finances to him. When the Tyrell party finally left, Ned allowed himself a moment to sit in silence, hands pressed over his eyes. He pictured Winterfell's courtyard, the crisp northern air, the laughter of his children. He imagined the hush of snow and the warmth of a hearth. In the north, life was harsh, but at least it was straightforward. Being king felt like wrestling with a many-headed beast, each head threatening a different catastrophe. He reminded himself that he had chosen this path out of duty, out of love for the realm and the memory of those who had died to see it freed from tyranny. Yet the cost of wearing a crown eroded him day by day. A knock sounded on the door. He straightened, smoothing his expression. "Enter." A guardsman appeared. "Pardon, your grace, but Prince Oberyn Martell wishes to speak with you. He's in the hall." Ned's pulse tightened. "Show him in," he said, rising to greet the Dornish prince. He braced himself for the storm that was Oberyn. Oberyn Martell swept in like a gust of desert wind. He was dressed in light, flowing garb the color of sun-baked sand, adorned with golden serpents embroidered on his sleeves. His skin was tanned deep from the Dornish sun, and his dark eyes gleamed with intelligence and simmering anger. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with a show of courtesy that felt deliberately theatrical. Ned inclined his head. "Prince Oberyn, I trust you're well." "Well enough," Oberyn replied. He studied Ned a moment, then paced into the room. The air between them felt charged. "I grow impatient, King Eddard. I've come on behalf of House Martell, and we've yet to see justice for Elia. My time in King's Landing has been spent talking in circles. No real progress." Ned searched Oberyn's face. The man wore his sorrow like a hidden blade, always ready to strike. "I understand. I wish it were simpler. War crimes are complex matters. Many lords fought under various banners. The specific blame for Elia's death and her children's must be laid at the correct door. We cannot simply accuse a great house without solid evidence." Oberyn's lip curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Evidence? Yes, that word is bandied about to conceal inaction. Everyone knows who murdered Elia and her babes. Gregor Clegane and his accomplices. They served Tywin Lannister. If you want the truth, it's there for you to seize, unless you fear the Lion of the Rock too greatly to pull back his mane." Ned met Oberyn's gaze steadily. "I do not fear Tywin, but I do fear plunging the realm into another war. If I arrest Gregor Clegane without procedure, Tywin will retaliate. Thousands could die." Oberyn stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Thousands already died for the sins of the Targaryens, Lannisters, and Baratheons. My sister was a princess of royal blood, yet that did not spare her from a brutal end. If the crown cannot give us justice, then House Martell will take it. We will not be silent forever." Ned's tone softened. "I would not ask you to be silent. I only ask for patience while we unravel this through the laws of the realm. If you have witnesses or accounts, any proof of Tywin's direct command, I promise you I will act." The Dornish prince studied him, eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you truly mean that. You have a reputation for honor, Stark. But the Lannisters are snakes who hide beneath fancy cloaks." He paused, glancing at Ned's papers and the traces of dust motes glimmering in a sunbeam. "I'll give you a small window of time to do what must be done, but not forever. And if you choose an action, don't be surprised when Dorne acts for itself." Ned inclined his head in reluctant acceptance. "I thank you for speaking with me rather than taking matters into your own hands. I'm working on a plan to encourage Tywin to come to King's Landing through a grand tournament, perhaps. We might then hold a formal inquiry. Would Dorne attend such a gathering and provide testimony?" Oberyn gave a short laugh. "A tournament? Very well. Dorne's knights can compete as well as any. Yes, we'll come and I will speak openly. Be certain Tywin hears my words. If he refuses to appear, let it be seen by all that he cowers from the truth. Ned lowered his voice. But if he does appear, promise me you will not provoke open violence. The realm can't endure another war. Oberyn's expression turned cold. I'll promise not to murder Tywin in the streets. That's the best I can offer. Then, as though he remembered himself, his manner eased slightly. Our houses need not be enemies, King Eddard. I can see in your eyes that you despise the brutality that took Elaya's life. Let us hope your convictions hold when they are tested. With that, Oberyn gave a curt bow and strode from the room, his robes trailing behind him. Ned exhaled, suddenly aware of the tension strung through his shoulders and neck. Such was the precarious dance he must perform, balancing justice for a grievous wrong without casting the realm into flames. He stood there for a long minute, focusing on the window where the city's roof sprawled under the midday sun. One crisis to the next, an unending chain. He allowed himself a brief break, sipping watered wine brought by a servant, then went about the day's remaining tasks. There were letters to be read from the north, from Winterfell, updates on how the castle fared in his absence, how the smallfolk coped with the lingering chill after winter. There was a missive from the Night's Watch, too, speaking again of troubling sightings, shadows in the forest, missing rangers. The new Lord Commander, a grizzled ranger named Jeor Mormont, pleaded for more men. Ned could send only a few recruits, though he vowed to gather supplies. Even as he penned his reply, he felt a pang of unease. Tales of the White Walkers were old ghosts. Yet the letters from the wall carried a strange urgency. Perhaps it was merely wildlings or the unsettled ravages of winter. And yet, his reflections were interrupted by a messenger who announced that Lord Tywin Lannister's latest courier had arrived, bearing a sealed parchment. Ned unrolled it and read the missive in silence. Tywin wrote with a measured hand, graciously acknowledging the crown's victory over the Ironborn and expressing regret that he had not been able to support the war effort directly. He made no mention of Oberyn Martell or the calls for justice. Instead, he requested the king's attention on matters of trade tariffs with Lannisport and discreetly hinted that House Lannister had large stores of gold that might be loaned to the crown under favorable conditions. If the crown would reciprocate by granting certain privileges in court. A golden leash, Ned thought grimly. He set the letter aside, ignoring the frustration welling in his chest. Tywin was playing his own game, ignoring the swirl of accusations to focus on business. If Tywin refused to acknowledge the Martell matter, it would fester further. Ned hoped the proposed tournament would draw him out. If gold and pride were at stake, Tywin might feel compelled to attend. Then, at least, Oberyn would have the chance to confront him in a public forum. As the day wore on, Ned moved through his duties. He met with scribes to finalize the details of how the crown would repay certain debts, spoke briefly with Varys about new whispers from Essos, no confirmations of Targaryen alliances, but suspicious movements of gold in Pentos. Finally, as evening shadows stretched across the courtyard, Ned left the official chambers behind. He longed for the quiet of the Godwood or even a moment with his family. He headed toward the royal apartments. In a corridor near the living quarters, he heard laughter, light, musical laughter he knew well. Sansa. Stepping through an archway, he saw his daughter standing with her Septa and Arya. Sansa wore a gown of pale green embroidered with tiny flowers, her hair done up in the southern style. Arya, by contrast, wore a simpler brown tunic and breeches, likely something she'd worn while practicing with wooden swords. The stark difference made Ned smile. Arya's hair was loose and tangled, her face smudged with some unknown dirt or dust. Sansa curtsied upon seeing him. "Father," she said, eyes bright. "We were just going to the courtyard. Arya wants to see the knights spar." Arya stepped forward eagerly. "You should come, father. Ser Roderick is there, and I heard they might have a new master-at-arms showing some fancy sword moves." Ned felt a flicker of warmth at their enthusiasm. He realized how little time he'd spent with them since returning from the Iron Islands. "I'd like that," he said gently, but then a pang of duty reminded him he was expected to meet with Catelyn and some northern bannermen. "I have an engagement now, but perhaps tomorrow?" Arya's face fell for a moment, but she tried to hide it with a shrug. "Tomorrow, then." Sansa smiled politely, though her eyes held a hint of disappointment. "Yes, father." Ned placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "Go on, enjoy yourselves. Don't stray too far, though." He took a breath. "Sansa, mind your Septa. Arya, try not to get into trouble." Arya grinned with a mischievous tilt to her head. "I'll do my best." Then she darted off, Sansa and the Septa following more sedately. Ned watched them go, a silent ache in his chest. His daughters were growing up surrounded by the intrigues of a southern court. He worried how it might shape them. Sansa, dreamy and gentle, might become enthralled with courtly romance. Arya, rebellious and fierce, might chafe under every rule. He wanted to protect them, yet the demands of kingship kept pulling him away. Perhaps if he secured the realm's peace, they could return to win. Fell for a time and he could rule from afar. But that thought felt like a distant fantasy. He made his way to his apartments, where Catelyn waited with two northern lords, men who had traveled south to pledge further support and discuss the upcoming harvest. They spoke of the wide plains near the neck, the best routes for shipping grain to the Crownlands. Ned listened attentively, though his mind drifted. He kept recalling Oberyn's warning, Tywin's letter, the talk of Targaryen loyalists, and the Night's Watch pleas. Problems heaped on problems, stacking to the rafters. By the time the meeting ended, darkness had fully settled over King's Landing. Catelyn dismissed the servants, then turned to Ned. "You look exhausted," she observed gently, touching his arm. He nodded, letting out a breath. "It's been a long day. Oberyn came to see me. He's impatient, furious." Tywin sent a letter about unrelated matters, ignoring the Martell accusations. "Robert's wound festers, the treasury is half empty, and the Targaryens might have friends here in the capital. Sometimes I wonder if all this will ever be resolved." Catelyn's expression softened. She moved closer, resting her head briefly against his chest. "You bear it all with such dignity, Ned. But you can't carry the entire realm on your back alone." She hesitated, then asked the question that always lingered unspoken. "Any news of them?" She rarely said Targaryens aloud, perhaps recalling how Rhaegar had taken Lyanna. Ned shook his head. "No firm news. Varys hears rumors, but nothing concrete. Viserys and Daenerys are likely still wandering Essos, biding their time. We can't ignore them, but I refuse to send assassins. I won't stoop to the methods that ended Rhaegar's children." Catelyn nodded slowly. "What if they come back with an army? The Golden Company, perhaps? It's said they've always had ties to Targaryen bastards. Could we withstand that?" "The Golden Company is formidable," Ned admitted. "But they'd need a foothold. None of the great houses here would side openly with them, at least not yet. If we keep the realm peaceful and strong, a Targaryen invasion would be less likely to gain support." Her eyes flicked to the window where the lights of the city glowed against the night sky. "Sometimes I lie awake and think of all the threats. Not just Targaryens, but Ironborn, Dornish grudges, wildlings in the north. It never ends." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I know. But we'll weather it together, Cat." Then he forced a small smile. "Shall we retire? I can hardly keep my eyes open." She agreed, and they retreated to the quiet of their bedchamber. Yet even there, Ned did not find true rest. All night, his dreams were haunted by fleeting images: Oberyn's fiery glare, Tywin's unreadable visage, the battered form of Robert thrashing in pain. In one dream, he saw Lyanna, her face pale as she lay dying, whispering a plea he could not decipher. When he reached for her, she vanished like mist. He woke in the darkness, heart pounding. Catelyn slept beside him, unaware of his turmoil. Morning came too soon. Another day of decisions loomed, but first he made a point of going to the courtyard to observe the knight's training. He had promised Arya he might watch, and though he could not linger long, he wanted at least to keep his word in part. When he arrived, a handful of men were sparring with wooden swords, their shields ringing as they exchanged blows. Arya stood at the sidelines, bright-eyed. Sansa was not there, likely in the sept for her lessons. Ser Roderick Castle, gruff and formidable even in training gear, called out corrections to the younger squires. Arya spotted Ned and beamed, hurrying over. "Father, look." She pointed to the far side of the yard, where a man with a lean build and a narrow face was demonstrating a swift flurry of strikes against a practice dummy. "They say he's called Syrio Farrell from Bravos. He's going to teach me dancing, but with swords." Ned raised an eyebrow. "Dancing with swords?" Arya nodded eagerly. "It's a style of fighting they call the water dance. I asked if I could learn, and he said yes, if you permit it." Ned studied the Bravosi man for a moment. Syrio Farrell had a confident grace, stepping lightly on the balls of his feet, every motion efficient and precise. He reminded Ned of the Bravusi he had once seen in the free cities, men who fought with slender blades and swift, darting movements. "Are you certain this is what you want?" Arya's reply was immediate. "Yes, father. I want to be able to defend myself, like any knight. Even better than a knight." Ned felt a rush of conflicting emotions. She was only a girl of 9, yet in these times perhaps it was wise for her to learn some defense. "Very well," he said at last, "but be mindful of your lessons with Septa Mordain too. Your mother expects you to know a lady's arts." Arya's face scrunched, but she nodded. "I promise." He gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Go on then. Show me what you've learned." As she scampered off, Ned approached Syrio, exchanging a polite nod. "If you're to train my daughter, I expect you to guard her well." Sirio's dark eyes sparkled. The little one is quick, eager. She has the heart of a warrior. I will teach her to see with all her senses, to move with the grace of water. You have my word she will learn discipline. Ned thanked him and stepped back, watching as the Braavosi guided Arya through basic footwork. The wooden swords tapped and clacked. Arya's face radiated joy. For a moment, Ned felt a pang of regret that life in King's Landing forced her to grow in ways he had never imagined. But perhaps it was not all bad. She was discovering her strengths. Satisfied that she was in good hands for the moment, Ned took his leave. His next meeting was with Grand Maester Pycelle and a few city officials regarding the outbreak of sickness in Flea Bottom. The cramped district suffered from poor sanitation, leading to fevers and pox. Pycelle recommended quarantines and distributions of healing potions. That meant more silver from the already strained treasury. Nonetheless, Ned approved a modest allocation. Disease, if left unchecked, could spread through the city like wildfire. The last thing he needed was an epidemic on top of everything else. Afternoon brought the arrival of a raven from the Eyrie. Lisa Arryn, Jon's wife, sent a brief, anxious letter declaring that she feared for her child's safety in the Vale and asking if the court would send knights to reinforce the Bloody Gate. She hinted at bandit raids, possible infiltration by unscrupulous Sel's words. Ned furrowed his brow, wondering if her fears were exaggerated. Lisa's temperament tended toward paranoia. But if there was true danger, ignoring her pleas could leave the Vale vulnerable. He resolved to speak with Jon about it. At sunset, Ned finally found a moment to himself. He made his way to the Godwood, craving the quiet comfort of nature. The heart tree's white bark glimmered faintly in the dim light, its red leaves rustling in a soft evening breeze. He knelt at the base, shutting his eyes. The old gods were not as commonly worshipped in the south, but their presence here offered him a sliver of home. He recited a silent prayer, asking for guidance, wisdom, and the strength to protect his family and realm. Footsteps sounded behind him, and he turned to see Jon Arryn approaching quietly. Ned stood, offering a weary smile. "Jon, you've come at a good time. I was seeking a moment's peace." Jon nodded. "I won't disturb you long. I just received new intelligence from Varys. He wanted me to deliver it personally, away from prying ears." Ned's stomach knotted. "More about the Targaryens?" Jon's expression turned grim. "Yes. Varys has reason to believe a certain merchant, one who regularly travels between Pentos and King's Landing, may be funding Viserys Targaryen. Small amounts, perhaps, but enough to help him stay afloat. Also, there's talk that Daenerys has wed a powerful warlord in the Dothraki Sea." Ned's heart thudded. A Dothraki warlord? If that's true, Viserys might try to use the Dothraki horde to invade Westeros. Jon let out a slow breath. That's the fear. But the Dothraki have never crossed the narrow sea in force, not without ships, and they despise the open water. "Yes, that's one comfort," Ned agreed. "Still, I've heard stories that if a strong Khal becomes determined enough, he might find a way to cross. Or gather enough wealth to hire ships." Jon frowned. Even a fraction of the Dothraki horde could cause chaos if they landed. Our knights aren't accustomed to fighting mounted savages with their speed. Ned gazed at the heart tree's carved face, recalling how swiftly the realm could be thrown into disarray by an outside force. "We'll keep watch. Strengthen coastal defenses. Maintain an eye on what ships come and go. In the meantime, we can't ignore this merchant funneling funds. We should identify him quietly. If he's breaking our laws by supporting a pretender, we need to act." Jon nodded. "I'll see to it. Varys has his little birds all over the city. He'll likely provide us a name soon." They fell silent, both men contemplating the swirl of threats. Finally, Jon placed a hand on Ned's shoulder. "You've done well, Ned. The realm stands. But the burdens are many. Don't let them crush you." Ned managed a faint smile. "Your guidance helps keep me upright, my friend. I only hope we can guide Westeros to a lasting peace." Jon squeezed gently. "So do I." He withdrew, his gaze drifting to the old godwood. "It's a rare thing in these lands, a weirwood in the south. I sometimes wonder if the old gods can truly hear us here." Ned glanced at the carved face, the red sap like old blood. "I like to believe they can, in their own way." Jon nodded, then excused himself, leaving Ned once more in solitude. The soft hush of the godwood enveloped him. He listened to the wind threading through the branches. His thoughts roamed, the Targaryens in exile, Oberyn's thirst for vengeance, Tywin's maneuvers, Robert's wound, the plague in Flea Bottom, the Night's Watch's pleas, the Greyjoy hostages who now roamed the castle in sullen silence. Every piece demanded his attention. Yet he was only one man. He looked up at the night sky. Stars glinted faintly above the towering walls. In the north, the sky would be clearer, the constellations shining bright over snow-laden fields. Here in King's Landing, torchlight and the haze of the city dimmed the heavens. But a few stars still peeked through. He found the ice dragon, a pattern he had learned as a boy in Winterfell. Seeing it made him feel a flicker of reassurance, as if the north itself whispered courage into his heart. Stepping away, he left the godwood behind and made his way back to the Red Keep's main keep. The corridor torches painted flickering shadows on the stones, and he passed only a few guards who saluted with subdued deference. He thought of the future. Should the rumored tournament come to pass, it might be a chance to corral the main actors, Oberyn, Tywin, other great lords. But it could also be a tinderbox just waiting for a spark of pride or vengeance. He had no illusions about controlling every nuance. He could only attempt to steer events and pray the realm emerged whole. That night, Ned lay in bed, his mind churning too restlessly for sleep. Catelyn dozed beside him, worn out by a day of duties. He considered lighting a candle and reading scrolls by the bedside, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he stared at the ceiling's dim shapes, thinking back to the day the crown was placed upon his head. The memory felt distant now, though it had not been so long. At the time, he believed that being king meant ending a war and rebuilding a wounded land. He had not anticipated the endless undercurrents, each with the power to drown him if he misstepped. Eventually, sleep found him, but it brought no calm. His dreams swirled with half-formed images of a great tournament field. Rows of spectators cheered as knights in shining armor clashed in the lists. Then the cheers turned to screams and the ground was awash in blood. Oberyn Martell faced a giant clad in Lannister red, their spears crossing in a blur. A horn sounded and thunder rumbled. Ned tried to call out, but no words formed. Then came the roar of something monstrous, a shadow that loomed across the sky, shaped like a dragon. When he turned to confront it, he saw only a single burning red eye, as though the face of winter itself glared at him from beyond the wall. He awoke drenched in sweat, the first pale light of morning seeping through the shutters. He reached out a hand to steady himself, chest heaving. Catelyn stirred. "Ned," she whispered, voice groggy. "It's nothing," he said softly, though the dream's images clung like cobwebs. "Go back to sleep." But he could not. Dawn was approaching, and with it another day's trials. He rose, dressed in silence, and made his way outside before most of the castle awoke. The sky glowed a soft pink over the Blackwater Bay, and the early call of gulls echoed along the walls. Standing on a balcony overlooking the city, Ned thought of the thousands of souls stirring in the cramped houses below. They depended on him to maintain order and peace, to ensure food, safety, and justice. Yet justice was the very thing threatening to spark a new conflict with Dorne. And there were heavier forces in the world, the unknown cunning of Tywin Lannister, the potential threat of exiled Targaryens, the ancient horrors rumored beyond the wall. He inhaled the sea air. The prospect of hosting a tournament began to solidify in his mind. It felt risky, but short of traveling personally to Casterly Rock or to Sunspear, it was perhaps the only practical way to bring both Tywin and Oberyn into the same space. If fate were kind, negotiations might defuse the worst of the tension. If not, the realm would face the consequences in public view. Ned could only hope that by acting openly in the sight of lords and knights from all corners of the land, any single faction would hesitate to unleash violence. By the time the sun rose fully, Ned had resolved to proceed. Gathering his small council, he announced his decision. A grand tournament would be held in King's Landing in 3 moons' time, ostensibly to celebrate the realm's recovery after the Ironborn Rebellion and the close of a harsh winter. The council reacted with mixed responses. Stannis and Jon Arryn understood the logic but warned of potential chaos. Peter Baelish rubbed his chin, calculations dancing behind his eyes, but confirmed he could scrape together enough gold from the city's resources and external loans to finance the spectacle. Grand Maester Pycelle fussed about the timing, muttering that spring fevers might still linger, while Vera smiled enigmatically and praised the idea as a chance to strengthen the realm's unity. Invitations were drafted and sent by Raven to every corner of Westeros. Lords, knights, and notable figures from each region would be encouraged to attend, including the Martells of Dorne and the Lannisters of the West. Ned wrote a personal letter to Tywin, phrased with courtesy and emphasizing the opportunity for great knights to test their mettle. He did not mention Oberyn's demands, nor the shadows of old crimes. Tywin was not a fool, of course, he would know the undercurrent. But Ned hoped the public nature of the invitation would make refusal difficult. As the days passed, messages of acceptance began to flow in. Mace Tyrell sent a flowery reply, proclaiming that Highgarden's knights would surely capture the lists. The Lords of the Stormlands, with Robert incapacitated, pledged to send strong representatives. Brynden Blackfish Tully agreed to come from Riverrun, though Hoster Tully's health was said to be declining. The Vale's attendance was guaranteed under Jon Arryn, though Lisa remained in the Eyrie with her son. From Dorne, Prince Doran Martell wrote a curt note indicating that Oberyn would represent House Martell's interests, along with a retinue of spearmen. Oberyn himself did not write, but Ned was sure he was preparing. From the west, Tywin's reply arrived, a short, impeccable note thanking the king for his gracious invitation and confirming that House Lannister would send its champions. It mentioned Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, possibly competing in the justs. Ned felt a surge of unease at the thought. Jaime Lannister wearing the Kingsguard's white cloak and representing the Lannisters in a public show, an irony if ever there was one. Still, if Tywin was coming or sending his children, that was the desired outcome. Robert remained bedridden, though slowly improving. Pycelle and the healers changed his dressings daily. The infection subsided in time, leaving an ugly scar. On a day when Ned visited, Robert sat propped on pillows, his broad chest diminished from inactivity. Yet his voice had regained some vigor. He demanded to know the details of the upcoming tournament, snorting with a mix of envy and bitterness when Ned described the planned events. Robert bemoaned his inability to ride in the lists himself, longing for the days when he smashed foes with his warhammer. Still, Ned could see a glimmer of excitement in Robert's eyes at the idea of feasting, drinking, and cheering for his favored knights. Perhaps this event would stir the old Robert awake, if only in spirit. Months slipped by as the city prepared. Workers constructed stands and pavilions outside the city walls, clearing space for the jousting lanes, the melee ground, and the archer's field. Merchants arrived in droves, bringing tents, wines, silks, and all manner of goods to sell to the throngs who would flock to King's Landing. Street singers composed new ballads in the hopes of winning a lord's patronage. Brothels prepared for a surge of customers. Guards and city watchmen drilled relentlessly to keep order, for a large influx of visitors also meant cutpurses, brawlers, and worse. In the Red Keep, the corridors buzzed with talk of who might claim the jousting crown. Some wagered on Jaime Lannister, others on Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, famed for his skill and beauty. Rumors whispered that Oberyn might enter the lists himself, though he was better known for his skill with a spear than a lance. The melee promised to be just as fierce, with knights from all corners vying for prizes and glory. Ned spent little time indulging such speculation. He busied himself ensuring every detail was managed, that the gold was arranged, that the city was fortified in case the gathering turned sour. Catelyn oversaw the welcoming arrangements for highborn guests, ensuring the castle's best chambers and feasts were ready. Sansa was enthralled by the forthcoming spectacle, talking of banners and gallant knights, while Arya continued her training under Syrio Farrell, caring little about fancy tournaments. Robb had stayed behind in Winterfell to learn the duties of a northern lord, but Brandon, Little Bran, was brought down to see some of the festivities. He was wide-eyed at the bustle of the capital, though Catelyn kept him under close watch. Ned tried to carve out moments to spend with his sons, daughters, and wife, though duty often pulled him away. At last, the tournament's opening day arrived. The field outside King's Landing thronged with color and noise. Tents of every hue sprouted like mushrooms across the green, pennants snapping in the breeze. Thousands of small folk poured in to witness the spectacle, crowding around the perimeter, finding vantage points on hills or rooftops where they could glimpse the jousting lanes. Vendors called out selling oast meats, honeyed nuts, and flagons of ale. Musicians roamed with pipes and drums, weaving a merry cacophony. Yet beneath the revelry lay a tension as tangible as a drawn bowstring. Ned rode out in procession with his household guard, wearing royal regalia, though simpler than Targaryen rulers of old. He wore a cloak of dark wool trimmed with silver fur, a gold circlet around his brow engraved with the direwolf and stag. The people cheered his arrival. Some cried out, "Long live the Stark King!" Others waved scraps of cloth or ribbons in salute. Near the royal stands, lords and ladies clustered in their finery. The Tyrells in green, the Redwine twins in burgundy, bannermen of the Vale in pale blues, and more. Stannis Baratheon was absent from the pomp, preferring to remain in the city, though Renly Baratheon was there, wearing a green cloak pinned with a golden stag, smiling at the crowds. Ned took his seat on a raised platform beside the dais reserved for other high lords. Catelyn sat next to him, her posture regal yet visibly anxious. Sansa perched beside her mother, eyes shining with excitement, while Bran, fidgety with curiosity, sat on Ned's other side, awed by the mass of people. Guards in stark livery stood around them, vigilant. A short distance away, Robert was carried in on a litter, accompanied by a personal guard. Though still weak, he insisted on witnessing the spectacle. When he was settled into a comfortable seat, he waved to the crowd, and they roared with admiration for the hero of the trident. Then came the arrival of the Lannisters. Jaime rode in full Kingsguard regalia, his golden hair gleaming in the sun, causing a stir of admiration among the ladies in the stands. Cersei was absent, choosing to remain at Casterly Rock, no doubt a statement of her own. Tyrion Lannister arrived quietly, in the retinue's rear, giving a polite bow when he spotted Ned. Finally, Tywin Lannister appeared, clad in regal finery of crimson and gold, flanked by bannermen. His face was as stern and inscrutable as ever. The crowd's cheers shifted to a more reserved rumble, respect mixed with wariness. Tywin rode to the dais, dismounted, and offered a stiff bow to Ned. Ned returned a measured nod. They exchanged no words in that moment, but the tension bristled in the air like static before a storm. Then the Martell contingent swept in, led by Oberyn, his amber cloak swirling over burnished armor. The Dornish banners, a sun pierced by a spear, fluttered boldly. The crowd's reaction was divided. Some cheered the exotic warriors, others eyed them with suspicion or even disdain, mindful of old rivalries. Oberyn dismounted near the dais, bowed to Ned with a flourish, then turned his gaze on Tywin. The two men locked eyes. For a heartbeat, it seemed like all sound in the arena faded. A flicker of challenge passed between them before they broke contact. No swords were drawn, but the threat was implicit. At last, the ceremonial trumpets sounded and the herald announced the king's presence and the official start of the grand tournament. The crowd erupted in cheers, drums rolled, and a line of brightly caparisoned knights rode into the lists. It was a riot of color and pageantry. Ned rose, lifting a hand for silence. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the field with a calm authority. Lords and ladies, knights and small folk alike, we gather in celebration of peace restored to the realm after the trials of winter and war. May these games bring us not only glory and triumph, but fellowship. Let the seven guide our hearts to honor and chivalry, that Westeros may stand united in peace. The crowd roared its approval. Ned sat again, turning to Catelyn. She gave him a tense but proud smile. The justs began, a thunder of hooves, splintering lances, knights unhorsed to the delight or dismay of spectators. In the stands, bets were placed, gossip flowed like wine, and the air buzzed with excitement. Jaime Lannister rode early in the lists, unhorsing a lesser knight in spectacular fashion. Loras Tyrell dazzled with his handsome looks, presenting a rose to a blushing maiden before taking his tilt. The Martell knights showed off nimble horse work, though many Dornishmen excelled more at skirmish fighting than the heavy lance. Between the matches, Ned scanned the stands. Tywin sat impassive, offering polite applause when Lannister-affiliated knights performed well. Oberyn watched every tilt with a predator's gaze, occasionally exchanging words with his Dornish companions. At one point, Ned saw Oberyn speak to Tyrion Lannister, a brief conversation that ended with Tyrion shrugging. The tensions that lay beneath the spectacle were as real as sharpened steel. So far, no open quarrels, but the day was young. During a brief break, servants brought trays of wine, sweetmeats, and fruit to the royal box. Sansa clapped excitedly for the gallant knights, enthralled by the pageantry. Bran stared wide-eyed at the horses galloping past. Catelyn murmured that Loras Tyrell was likely to win many hearts and possibly the champion's purse. Ned simply watched, his thoughts half on the colorful tilts and half on how to orchestrate a meeting between Tywin and Oberyn that might lead to resolution. One thing was clear, their mutual animosity would not fade on its own. On the second tilt after the break, a tall, muscular knight in plain gray armor took the field. He bore no sigil. The crowd murmured, trying to guess his identity. The knight lowered his visor, and the herald announced him as Ser Unknown of the Vale. His opponent was a bannerman of the Reach. The two knights charged at each other in a storm of hooves and steel. The clash was brutal, the lances shattering. The Grey Knight's blow struck true, knocking the Reach Knight clean off his mount. An upset given the Plain Knight's anonymity. The crowd erupted in stunned chatter as the unknown knight dismounted, helped his opponent up, then raised his visor just enough to reveal a fierce grin. Ned leaned forward, intrigued. He glanced at Jon Arryn, who sat nearby. Jon looked equally puzzled. So did the Vale Lords, who should have known every knight from their region. Who was this mysterious contender? The day wore on, and the unknown knight continued to win tilts with surprising skill, unhorsing a pair of formidable jousters. Whispers spread through the stands, speculating that it might be the Hound in secret, or a disgraced heir seeking redemption, or even a disguised woman. Yet no one had a definitive answer. Ned observed carefully, suspecting an elaborate gambit. Could it be a ruse by Oberyn's men or Tywin's men? Or was it simply someone seeking glory away from his house name? By late afternoon, the brackets narrowed. Jaime Lannister, Loras Tyrell, and the unknown Grey Knight all advanced. Elsewhere, lesser knights duked it out in the preliminary matches. The next tilt pitted Jaime against the unknown knight. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. If this Grey Knight could best the Kingslayer, it would be a major upset. Ned found his heart unexpectedly hammering. He realized, with a small jolt, that despite the tension and political undercurrents, the tournament's raw excitement was infectious. Jaime and the Grey Knight took their positions. Trumpets blared. The horses surged forward. 2 lances descended, aimed for each other's shields. The crack of impact echoed across the field. Jaime's lance shattered, but the Grey Knight barely wavered. Jaime swayed in the saddle. A collective gasp rose from the stands. On the second pass, Jaime readied himself more carefully. Again, the horses thundered, and this time Jaime struck the Grey Knight squarely, sending him reeling backward in the saddle. But he did not fall. On the final pass, the deciding tilt, both knights lowered their lances with perfect timing. The collision sent splinters flying. Both knights were knocked off their horses simultaneously, landing hard on the ground in a swirl of dust. The crowd erupted into cheers and groans, uncertain who had won. Squires rushed to help both men. Jaime was on his feet first, limping slightly but with his helmet in hand. The Grey Knight also rose, staggering but upright. The herald conferred with the judges, then announced that both were unhorsed at the same moment, an unprecedented tie. The stands roared with approval. Jaime offered a curt salute, though he scowled in frustration. The Grey Knight did the same, and together they marched off the field. An aura of mystery clung to that figure in gray. Ned wondered if the knight would reveal himself at some point. Perhaps it was a cunning ploy, or perhaps just a man who preferred anonymity. The crowd's attention soon shifted to Loras Tyrell's next match, and Ned allowed himself a silent exhale. So far, no fights had erupted in the stands between the Martells and the Lannisters. Tywin and Oberyn remained in their seats, radiating tension but showing restraint. As evening approached, the justs concluded for the day, with Loras Tyrell declared the top competitor thus far. A feast was to follow in the Red Keep's Great Hall. Ned dreaded the prospect of seating Oberyn and Tywin in the same chamber with wine and sharp tongues, but it was necessary. Perhaps over shared bread and salt they could find some civility, or at least avoid bloodshed. The great hall glowed with torchlight and candelabras. Tables groaned under roasted meats, fresh bread, pies, and flagons of wine. Minstrels played lively tunes while jugglers and fools entertained the crowd. The hall was packed with knights, lords, ladies, and courtiers. Ned sat at the high table with Catelyn, Robert, who demanded a seat of honor despite his injury, Tywin Lannister, Oberyn Martell, and other high-ranking guests. The tension at that table was palpable. Robert, perhaps sensing the awkwardness, filled his cup repeatedly, growing louder with each drink, reminiscing about the old battles. Across the hall, laughter, music, and clinking cups created a raucous backdrop. Sansa sat with other ladies, absorbing every detail of courtly manners, while Arya perched at the edge of the festivities, clearly bored by the formalities. Bran was with Catelyn's ladies-in-waiting, wide-eyed at the spectacle. Midway through the feast, Ned found an opportunity to lean toward Tywin. "My lord," he said quietly, "I'm grateful you accepted our invitation. I had hoped we might speak privately at some point." Tywin's green eyes flicked to Ned, calculating. "A private conversation. About what subject, precisely?" Ned did not flinch. "Old conflicts. Perhaps we can find a way to address lingering grievances without chaos." Tywin's jaw tightened fractionally. "I see. You refer to the Martell matter." Ned inclined his head. "Yes. Dorne demands an accounting for what happened to Princess Elia and her children. I believe the realm would benefit from an official inquiry. We cannot undo the past, but we can acknowledge it." Tywin's voice was icily calm. "If the Martells seek revenge, they should direct it at the men who wielded the blades. War is a savage business, Stark. Many atrocities were committed on both sides. Singling out House Lannister is convenient for them, but war seldom allows for clean hands." Ned held Tywin's gaze. "Still, if we ignore their cries, Dorne may seek its own justice. Another war would tear the kingdom apart." Tywin sipped his wine. I have no intention of kneeling to Martell's threats. Let him rave. He has no proof that I gave any such orders. Ned exhaled quietly. Would you at least meet with him under my mediation? Peacefully, in private? If only to lay words on the table. If no resolution is reached, at least we tried. Tywin considered, the flicker of torchlight dancing on his features. You are persistent. Very well, Stark. I will meet once. But I refuse to be subjected to insults or baseless accusations. If Martell does not behave himself, there will be no second meeting. Ned nodded. That's all I ask. Thank you, Lord Tywin. Before more could be said, Robert's booming voice interrupted, calling for Tywin to regale them with some tale of Lannister glory. Tywin obliged with a measured politeness, recounting a victory from his youth. Oberyn listened from across the table, expression as sharp as a drawn blade. Ned felt a faint stirring of hope. A meeting might happen. Perhaps it would accomplish something. Or perhaps it would end in a bloodbath. He prayed the gods would guide them all. When Tywin finished speaking, Oberyn seized the moment, raising his cup. A stirring tale, my lord, he said, voice smooth as silk. Reminds me of when my brother, Prince Doran, led a sortie against the Kingswood outlaws. Such honorable battles, yes? Though some wars are not so honorable. Tywin's gaze slid to Oberyn. War is never honorable, Prince Oberyn. It is a necessity forced upon us by fate and ambition. Oberyn's lips curved. True. And sometimes, in war, certain men use the chaos to commit monstrous deeds they'd never dare in the light of peace. A hush settled around the high table. Robert downed another gulp of wine, casting a nervous glance between them. Catelyn tensed. Ned placed a hand over hers, silently urging calm. Tywin's face remained impassive. The chaos of war does breed many horrors. One can only hope that justice prevails where it can. Oberyn set his cup down. Justice. I'd like to see that. Perhaps soon. We'll see if the realm truly values it or if that word is just a pleasant fiction. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Mercifully, the minstrels struck up a jaunty tune, and a troupe of dancers entered the hall, briefly distracting everyone. Ned let out a slow breath. At least the conversation had not ended in an outright brawl. He took advantage of the distraction to exchange a glance with Oberyn, who gave the tiniest nod, an acknowledgement that he'd meet Tywin if Ned arranged it. On the other side, Tywin allowed the faintest incline of his head at Ned. The rendezvous was set in motion. As the feast continued, Ned yearned for the sanctuary of his chamber. Yet he was king, and so he remained, exchanging pleasantries, accepting toasts, and maintaining decorum. Eventually, Robert was carried back to his rooms in a half-drunken state, still complaining that he couldn't mount a horse and join the justs. Tywin withdrew soon after, followed by his retinue. Oberyn stayed, conversing with a knot of Dornish companions and downing more wine, though he kept a guarded eye on the Lannisters' departure. At last, Ned was able to slip away, walking with Catelyn through the torchlit corridors. She released a breath of relief. That was tense. But perhaps tomorrow's meeting will help. Ned nodded, fatigue pressing on him. We can only hope. If it fails, the realm might edge closer to war. They parted at the door to their chamber. Catelyn went in, but Ned lingered, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Outside the window, the moon shone over a city brimming with revelers and visitors. He thought again of the unknown Grey Knight, the Targaryen threat, and the meeting that might decide peace or conflict. The challenges were mounting. Yet as he closed his eyes, he reminded himself that any progress, however slight, was better than none. In the morning, he intended to bring Tywin and Oberyn together in a private solar, far from prying eyes. Whether they would talk or fight remained uncertain. But Ned had to try. For all the burdens that pressed on him, he still clung to the hope that honor and reason might guide the realm to a better path even here in King's Landing, where shadows and secrets thrived. With that slender hope, he stepped inside and closed the door, ready to face yet another day of kingship on the morrow.